Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course International Studies in Vernacular Architecture. Today we are going to discuss about the concept of the second birth in the context of disaster recovery from various lessons from the disaster recovery. In our last class we did discuss about the concept of Bourdieu's second birth, where people are forced to live some other place and they need to know a set of rules. So that is where we discussed about the concepts of fields and games, because every game is followed with certain set of instructions and it has been played in a particular fields. So when the concept of field changes and the concept of game has to be adjusted with the set of instructions with that particular game. So this is where it takes time for anyone to adapt to the new set of practices. So this is where we are going to discuss about few disaster recovery aspects, and then we try to understand how the concept of space is produced. So when we talk about the produced, one of the important theory we discuss is the production of space by Henry Lefebvre, where he talks about three concepts, which is the conceived space, because each of these space in the post-disaster context, it is conceived by a certain visionaries. In the previous lectures, we did discuss about Mayor Corras's visions in the reconstruction of Ghibellina. Similarly, so every disaster is an opportunity of a change. So how they envisions this particular change, how it informs the physical space. So that is what we refer to the conceived space. Whereas the perceived space, it is based on the way people live, the spatial practices, how it shapes with the communities, how they dwell within that particular space. But then as a habitual processes, how they develop a particular emotions and attachment to a particular place. That is where we refer to the concept of a lived space. Of course, I am just explaining this theory in a very superficial manner so that every common man can understand it. But it is a very deeper concept of which he talks about the production of space. Today, I am going to discuss about three studies. One is my own study where I did in Gujarat earthquake study. And the second one is a secondary study from the Build Back Better El Salvador case. And the third is the tsunami recovery. Again, it is my own research study. So I'm going to discuss about some of these interesting relations, how spaces have been transformed, what kind of mechanisms have worked, what didn't, so that is what we are going to discuss. So somewhere in 2002, when I was working for a study purpose in Gujarat, in Kutch district, where it has hit by a massive major earthquake, and many of these dwellings have been demolished and they were damaged. They lost many lives. And when I visited there, I have visited a couple of villages and I did my work on that. So some of the images of that time's destruction, some of the schools were damaged, some of the hospitals were damaged, some of the historic forts were damaged, some of the industrial godowns were damaged, a lot of destruction. But what you can actually observe is here, some of these traditional houses, which are built with the wattle and daub constructions like bunga, majority of them, they survived for that major earthquake. Whereas many of the houses which were built with the brick and concrete houses, they are mostly suffered with damages, especially in the corners, in the junctions. That is what we can see on the technical point of it. Again, this is one of the image of the partially damaged hospital and some of the houses which were damaged partially. And because when it is partially damaged, people were not able to live there, and some of them, they vacated the houses. And obviously some of them who were homeless, they started living in these damaged houses. So these are some of the important understanding which I have got from the initial field work. So one of my friend Nataraj, he just spelled out in this way: shattered dreams, awful screams, nothing more, nothing more. Shaken floor, fallen floor, nothing more, nothing more. Silent boys, deserted toys, nothing more, nothing more. Tumble stones, broken bones, nothing more, nothing more. And this was the scenario of the immediate impact of the disaster. And as I just said about the traditional forms, the traditional house forms, which are referred as the bungas in the local language, they survived, and many of them, some of them are built on a raised stone wall, and they're made with the wattle and daub constructions. These are some of the evidences. And whereas the brick and concrete houses completely have demolished. And these are the houses which were built by the compressed stabilized earth blocks later on after the post-disaster by different NGOs. So these are the typical form of these dwellings. You can see these wattle and daub constructions, which are again put in these kind of mud construction, and this is called otla, the raised platform. So where the women perform their domestic activities like cooking food or cleaning certain things, and they also do maintain regularly. This is the interior of these places and the exteriors. And some of these common facilities, they have these community halls, they have these small commercial space and religious buildings, and people have developed some kind of small open bathroom. So when I said large infrastructure has been affected, first of all, schools is also a major impact factor. One of the important buildings which affected the children's future, because many of them, they are not able to go to school. So they almost in the first 1 year, the schools were closed, and because they were shut down, and different NGOs have come forward and they constructed with temporary materials like the bamboo classrooms. Some of them, they were constructed with the paper pipes, the laminated paper pipes, and the dining hall was made with the temporary with the canvas tents. So similarly, certain sewing machine training center for providing an alternative livelihoods, and training for the computers. That is where they're done with a small trusses, and so this is a kind of temporary rehabilitation efforts which has taken place. Whereas when we move on from the stage 1, which is a disaster impact, and then we move on to the immediate relief and rehabilitation, which is a temporary phase. But then at some point of time, they have to really search for locations for the permanent shelter, and also what are the resources and how we can build that. So this is one aspect where the technology transfer took place from the Auroville, and they have adopted the compressed stabilized earth blocks, the interlocking blocks, where they talk about sand 60 to 65%, silt and 10 to 5%, clay about 15 to 20%, and gravel about 10 to 15%. And of course, they make sure that the salinity is not greater than the 1200 ppm, and pH value is not less than. So in that way, there is a small manufacturing unit at Kutch Nav Nirman Abhiyan. Today it is referred as Hunashala. And so similarly, the ferro cement channels, the compressed stabilized earth blocks, these are the mud blocks, and they cover with for 2 days, and then later on they dry it for about 21 days. So these are the interlocking blocks, because so that the vertical reinforcement also can be placed in between these blocks, especially at the corners. So there are also other technologies which have been adopted in the disaster recovery program. This is a photograph from IIT Kendra in Hyderabad, where they have talked about again the interlocking. So they have designed some kind of precast frames and these hollow brick models where they put these blocks into these frames, and that's how they formulate these either roof panels or the wall panels like that. And in Gujarat, again, you have these geodesic domes which were also constructed. They're all earthquake resistant, but similarly, this is a model which they have constructed by the Nirmiti Kendra. And in Kutch Navnirman Abhiyan, they all did constructed about using the CSAB blocks, about G+1 stories, and something similar to the Bunga structure where there is a circular house and which has intermediate bands. There's this plinth band, sill band, and the roof band. And similarly, it has a kind of octagonal conical roof structure, which reflects to the traditional housing. They also adopted some ferrocement channels, the spheroidal domes, and they have these prefab toilets. So there are a variety of inputs which has been given based on some certain modern interfacing the modern and the traditional forms. Okay, so these are some of the houses in the village which I was studying. It was actually adopted by the Catholic Relief Services, and there are many other NGOs who were working at that point of time. And what you can actually see is, what they did was they built exactly at the same location where their house was. So in that way, the skeleton remains the same. Maximum in cases where the house was completely destroyed, they either make it adjacent to that. So there are some other NGOs who have built up these concrete technologies. Caritas, they have built these concrete houses, and this is again a hospital which was built even which can adapt to the 9 Richter scale. So, but interestingly, what one can notice is next to this particular NGO provided house, they started building using their local stone and local masons. They started building a stone shelters. This is where their local understanding of their house. So in fact, they were attached to this kind of housing before, and in fact, this community themselves, they have started building these things. So this is something which we have to understand at that point of time. Of course, there are many studies later on which have studied on Gujarat earthquake, but interestingly, what is important in Gujarat earthquake is the public participation. They engage the community in the construction work, and they train them, and the GSDMA issued certain guidelines for retrofitting and the newer constructions. And so in that way, this is one of the case where we can actually refer with significant amount of public participation, the community engagement, and it was very easy for them because most of the people actually they are either the craftsmen or they are having some tendency of working with these laborious activities. So in that way, it was very easy to mold them and to train them into the construction work so that they can able to supervise the housing process. So many of the NGOs have worked on that process. So we come to a second study. This is from the Build Back Better, which is edited by Michael Lyons and Theo Schilderman. And in that, the editors brings forward many different cases from India, Nepal, Bangladesh, El Salvador, Peru, Colombia, Kenya. So I'm just showing one example of the El Salvador case where it talks about the progressive housing and how it works. So first of all, I think everyone is aware that this is where we are talking about the El Salvador, which is the very smallest country in the Central America, and there is one is the poverty. 48% of the inhabitants of the El Salvador live in the poverty or in an extreme poverty. So the NGOs like the Spanish Red Cross and the Salvadoran Red Cross, they come together and they started working on this progressive housing as a solution. And so what does it mean? Because you see how the core house approach with this progressive housing, because the core house, they immediately developed a core dwelling unit and then they give it to the inhabitants, but then later on they gradually develop it. But here in the progressive housing, it goes in an incremental way in a different stages. For example, I think every one of you are aware of this Alexandros work, so where we talk about the housing units which are delivered to the dwellers, the above one, and gradually, after some time, how they modified these houses is almost like 100% incrementality. So, in one of their projects, what they did was they have divided into stage 3, 3 stages of work. In stage 1, there are contractors and the unskilled labor. In here, they're talking about the construction of the structural elements and the individuals of each family member within the community, and creating some employment opportunities and the increased participation. Whereas the stage 2, it talks about the site work supervisors and the materials. So Red Cross have supplied some materials and necessary technical advice. And again, the Red Cross have supported this. And then here the completion, the portable water bill supply and the household plumbing system. Let me show you how it works. So in the stage 1, which is a partial construction, so they basically do the excavation, laying the foundation, and they build an earthquake resistant structure, and they just give this kind of skeleton. What you can see, house at the end of the stage 1, you have these spaces for windows, where you have spaces for at the sill level, and there's a roof. There's a basic structure is given to them. And this is the second stage is should be completed by the owners. So what they should do is, the lintels of the doors and windows, so they put some money forward, and then they try to do the finishing touches of the whole house. And similarly, if you look at the contributions, the Red Cross has given materials that are not available locally, the workshops has been conducted, the technical support and monitoring. But the family bought some materials like doors and windows, and the labor, they also contributed to certain labor. In stage 3, they need to complete this with the service point of it, water supply and sanitation. So here they install some sink with the 2 taps and removing the grey water connected systems that remove the grey water. So like that, there are some participatory workshops which were conducted, so that they are not only given something, but they're trained in that so that they can manage it in a longer run. Of course, there were some issues with it, especially with the land tenure. How do they purchase? Because some of them who are not recognized within this program, they are avoided in this. So obviously there are issues with the land tenure, how we can procure that. And for them, they were not able to get into these programs. There are other challenges in this particular participatory approach. So now we talk about the third case of the tsunami recovery in Tamil Nadu. Here I was working in Tamil Nadu, and I did 3 case studies. How did I selected my case studies? So I visited almost 17 villages in 6 districts, and I visited the most affected and the least affected, and I also visited the in situ constructions and the relocated as well. So in that way, when I was traveling around, I could see the land of the northern part is more or less the fairly plain, and whereas when you move towards the south, it has a small hilly topography. And also here, mostly when I ever visited these villages, they are mostly from the Hindu communities. Here I could able to get the mixed communities, and most of the southern part of Tamil Nadu I could able to get the Roman Catholic communities. So, and also the northern part is more of a shallow water seas and the deep water seas. So obviously when we talk about shallow water and the deep water will have more fish, and that's how it has given more economical standard of these fishermen. So I have selected one Dalit island and one a village called Tarangambadi, where even Danish people live still there, some of them, and the Muslim people and the fishermen communities. But this is a completely a Roman Catholic community, Kovalam, and here the traditional panchayat is a church. So I have been doing work on a participatory approach, where I was almost living like a life of a fisherman, going to fishing with them, talking to them, understanding their daily behaviors, understanding their daily situations. And this has given me a greater understanding how the society performs. It's not a very shallow understanding, because after spending months and months with them, so everyday behavior, how I was able to understand their festivals, how they have changed. So this is one of the case where the case of Kovalam village, so where this is a traditional village, and you have these ceremonial buildings. The church is in the center, that's the village center. So after the tsunami, what they did was they moved these affected houses. Almost 88 houses were affected in this region, and they identified these 88 houses, and they have to move back, because there is a coastal regulation zone which implies that you cannot construct anything beyond these 500 meters. So in that way they have been able to found some of these lands which are government owned lands. And first initially they made as a project of 88 houses, and the church has approached some NGOs. And they have actually given some support of the construction of the dwelling. So the land belongs to the government, and then in that way these 88 houses were gone there. And later on the church realized, why not we take this as an opportunity, and why not we address the pre-disaster vulnerabilities. So that is where they have many frequent disputes with the neighbors, the water supply issues. So in that way some of these villagers came forward and they put some money forward, and they bought some other lands. And then the church has approached with other NGOs, and they supported their construction activities. So in that way the church plays an important role in identifying and bringing together. So one of the important difference what happened was, these people who were earlier having a houses, but now they are having a 10-year tenure. They are on only after 10 years they will get their tenure. But whereas these people, they bought the land, so from the beginning they had their ownership. So similarly after that the rule have changed, then later on they brought 2 more colonies here, and then they started developing. But what kind of changes has happened? So earlier these are the traditional forms. Many of them are joint families. There are about 400 households, but then after the tsunami they all scattered, they were disintegrated into nuclear families, and that's how it became 1,000 households after the post-tsunami. So this is a traditional housing pattern. They used to have a community well, and nearby is very narrow alleyways, what you can see here. These are some of the kind of traditional pattern of these houses, because they are living on the coastal side and it's very hot, and so in that way they used to always have a shade in these places. But whereas the newer constructions, it has followed more of a kind of urban lifestyle, where the gridiron patterns or the very linear patterns have been followed. And each house, they have, when they were allotted like this, later on the communities, they started building a compound walls, and they were given houses, but then they were, for the initial years, they were having issues with the water supply and sanitations. And people started extending their kitchens at the rear side, because these are the fishermen communities. They cook outside. So in that way, this is the auction center, and their harbor. So in that way, everything was near and dear in the old village setup. But then after the relocation, they almost have to walk for about 2 kilometers. By taking their diesel, their net, their gear, anything, their food, anything which they have to carry for their sea purposes, the fishing purposes. So they need to travel 2 hours. So about 2 kilometers. So in that way, what happened was, their distances have increased. And earlier, the women used to see that their man is coming, and they were able to go and take some food and they wait for them. But now they cannot see their boats, so now in that way they are not able to go and wait for them. And obviously when the men come back from sea, they are very hungry and they don't find the food, and automatically they are become a bit furious, and then they show all their anger on their house, the family members. So this is how a small aspect of not meeting their family members with the food also have certain implications with their relationships. And Earlier they used to participate in the church activities regularly, but now because they are not able to travel for 2 kilometers by walk, especially the older women, elderly people who are not able to come to the church regularly, and whether it is an economic needs, whether it is a cultural need, everything has become far away. And in fact, when they were living in these tiled houses, that is where when they were realizing, what kind of, when should I get a new house, a pakka house was a brick and concrete house. So after the tsunami, when the NGOs have asked them what kind of house you would like to have. So that is where exactly they said, we want a pakka house, but that's exactly what given to them, But now they realize it's very hot, it's not to their climatic needs. And similarly, the layout of the kitchen, in fact, the kitchen, they want to take the food from the kitchen, from which is facing to the outside to the multi-purpose room. So in that way, they are, according to their cultural norms, they don't want to take the food, show the food to others and take it to the other room. And also the toilets, they, some of them, they didn't like these attached toilets, and then they oriented that from the other side, and in fact some of them, they even constructed a toilet outside. Like as I said, the land tenure and the ownership, the people who were at the 88 houses, they got only after 10 years, but the people who put the money for by purchasing the land, at least they got the tenure, which indicates, imagine if they have to get married or if they have to spend some for any emergent activity, so they cannot sell these houses for the 10 years. Okay. Now, some of these women, they have actually extended their house fronts as shops for their economical needs, because some of them, they lost their husbands. They extended their kitchens. And similarly, this is the second case in Tarangambadi. It's a Danish colony, and this is Masilimananada temple. And here, if you see, just want to explain, this part of this settlement is occupied earlier by the Danish. You have the Dansburg fort, and you have some of the colonial buildings here. And this part is mostly predominantly occupied by the Muslim community. It goes back to the pre-colonial Muslim houses. And this is mostly the fisherman community. You can see the spatial understanding, how it's very vast in size and shape. And then it goes back to the fishermen. It's very closely knitted community. After the relocation, here SIFS was working, South Indian Federation of Fishermen Societies was working on it, and Dr. Benny Kuriakose was the architect. And they have actually done with the concept of the houses, and they actually did the whole habitat mapping exercise for this particular settlement. And then they were able to identify some land nearby, and then that's where the new cluster, some of these affected people, they were all migrated to the newer place. And the older settlements, if you look at it, they have these traditional houses with tiled roofs, with the verandas. The whole street networks are very friendly in nature, because they are referred as talking streets. In the evenings, everyone sit outside and talk. And when we actually also gathered certain information through their mental maps, like when we asked them about how do you understand about this place, how legible is this place is, and how it has changed. So some of them, they were able to draw some mental maps, but some of them, they were not able to draw any mental maps. So because for the first time, they were touching the pencil. So in that way, what we did was we given the maps of previous settlement and the post-tsunami settlement, before tsunami and after tsunami. And when we say give a hint of a landmark, let's say this is a temple, Renuka Devi temple. Oh, then they say, oh, my house is here. Then they say, I used to move around this Princess Street to drop my child in the school, go to the market here, go to the ice factory here, go to the harbor here. So in that way, he used to map all these points. The same thing when I refer to the school as a landmark, then, oh, my house is here, then I move around, my children goes like this. But this mental map is a very important phenomenon, because it actually given as a hint that why there is it is weakening the social networks across the communities. Because earlier these Muslim and the Hindu and the Christian communities, they were all linked with this Princess Street. So whether for the need of educational institutions or anything, they travel in this street. But today, after the tsunami, they are not able to walk down in this street. So in that way, many of them, when their interviews, they said, we are feeling very bored because my friends were not there, feeling isolated. We didn't understand what it is. But now with this map, we could able to see even a small walking pattern create certain network, create certain interaction, and it has changed completely after the tsunami. And again, this is again a Dalit island which I was used to go. These are about 11 to 14 villages, and we used to travel every day by boat and then study about their houses. We did some focus groups, and so here also you can see they already, before the provision has been handed over to the community, they already started expanding their kitchens and everything. So as a result, what you actually see here is a variety of encroachments and their extensions. Like for example, in these two houses, two brothers have got the house in the same street, so immediate and as an adjacent manner. So what they did was they constructed a single roof to represent one family. An extension of the kitchens at the rear side, and this woman, she lost her husband, and she's left over with 3 children, and she got a house, but how shall she survive? So that is where she started expanding, extended a shop in front of the house, and they have given a toilet, but then the toilet was converted as a puja rooms because they were they were not comfortable as per the vastu considerations. And though they were given some limited public space opportunities, people started encroaching the nearby places, and they started making other children playgrounds, and now at this point of time they even made this as a small school. And I'm going to show you a small video of how the people, the respondents, how they have responded, what are their understanding. So this is going to be a small video.
ஒரு ரவுண்டுக்குள்ள இருந்தோம். இப்போ வந்து வாளுக்கு ஒரு தசை. அப்போ அப்படின்னு பார்க்கும்போது அந்த முந்தி வளர்ந்த பிள்ளைகள் வந்து வளர்ந்த பாசமும் இப்போ வளர்ற பிள்ளைங்க வளர்ற பாசமும் ரொம்ப வித்தியாசப்படுது. இப்போ நான் 5 பேரும் அக்கா தங்கச்சி அண்ணன் தம்பி எல்லாம் 5 பேர் இருந்து ஒரு பிள்ளைய எப்படி பயன்படுத்துறது, ஒரு ஆள் 2 பேர் பயன்படுத்தும் போது அந்த பிள்ளையினோட பாசமானது ரொம்ப கம்மியாகுது. அப்போ முந்தி இருந்த பிள்ளைகள்லாம் வந்து எல்லாரையும் ஏறி அடிக்கும், அது வளர்ந்த பாசம். இப்போ இருக்கிற பிள்ளை வந்து நமக்கு ஒரு ஆள் விட்ட வர்றது கொஞ்சம் அச்சப்படுது. ஏன்? அது வளர்ற பாசம். அதனால பாசமா பாக்குறோம், ஆனா எப்பவும் கிட்ட இருக்கிறது பண்ணிடலாம். இப்ப அப்படி இல்லை, சிந்தித்து தான் செயல்படணும். முந்தி அப்படி இல்லை, ஒரு ஆள் ஒரு வாயிலிருந்து ஒரு வார்த்தை தான் 4 பேர் கூடி உடனே அதுக்கு ஒரு முடிவு செயல்படுத்த முடிஞ்சது. இப்ப அப்படி இல்லை, நாம அதை நினைச்சு இனி ஒரு கூட்டுக்குழுவுக்கு கொண்டு போய் அந்த கூட்டுக்குழு முடிவெடுத்து தான் அந்த காரியத்தை செய்யும். முன்னால வந்து இந்த பாறையிலாம் ஸ்டார் போடுவோம், பெருசா ஸ்டார் போட்டு தான் ரொம்ப ஆடம்பரமா. வந்து எங்களுக்கு வந்து பெரிய, நம்ம கிறிஸ்துவ மதத்துக்கு ஒரு பெரிய விழா, கிறிஸ்து பிறப்புன்னு சொல்றது வந்து ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமா மகிழ்ச்சியா கொண்டாடுற ஒரு விழா. அந்த விழா இப்போ வந்து எங்களுக்கு துக்க விழாவா இருக்கு. வந்து அந்த கிறிஸ்துமஸ் வந்து நம்ம கர்த்தர் வருகை, கிறிஸ்து வருகை வந்து எங்களுக்கு வந்து கிறிஸ்து இறப்பு மாதிரி, இந்த பெரிய வெள்ளிக்கிழமை மாதிரியே ஒரு தோற்றம் இந்த கிறிஸ்துமஸ் கொண்டு எங்களை நேரம் வரும். ஏன்னு சொன்னா அன்றைக்கு கடற்கரையிலேயே வாழ்ந்தோம். கடற்கரை மண்ணும் அந்த தண்ணியும் அவங்களுக்கு எப்பவுமே அந்த காற்றுல கடல் சுவாசம் கிடைச்சிக்கிட்டு இருந்தது. இப்போ அப்படி இல்லை, எல்லாம் மாறி எங்கேயோ வீடு வந்து 1 கிலோமீட்டருக்கு அங்க போயிருக்கா. அவ சமயத்துக்கு ஓடி வந்து புருஷனுக்கு உதவி செய்ய முடியாது கணவனுக்கு. அதே மாதிரி அவன் பசியோட கட்டு மரத்தை விட்டு கீழே இறங்குறான்னு சொன்னா உடனே வந்து உணவு கொடுக்க முடியாது. ஏன்? அவன் ஒரு வாரது தெரியாது. முதல்ல நாம எப்போ கரைக்கு வரமுன்னு எப்படி இருக்குது.
They feel very bored since they were interacting with them, they sharing their burdens and everything. No, since they left, they don't feel comfortable here. They long for their company.
வீடக நெருங்கியிருந்த பிறகு பிரச்சனைகள் அதிகம். இப்போ எல்லா வீடும் பக்கமா போனோம்னா பிரச்சனைகள் குறைவு. அதனால அமைதியான இடம் இப்போ இருக்கிறது தான் அமைதி. இதுதான் நிம்மதியான இடம்.
தள்ளி இருக்குதுங்கிற இது ஊரோட மக்களோட சேர்ந்து இருக்கிற அது காட்டு பக்கம், அது தள்ளி காட்டு பக்கம் இருக்குதான். அதாவது
கடல்ல இருந்து பயம் இல்லை, வேற என்ன இல்லை வேற நமக்கு
வேற வீட்டில் டாய்லெட்டு கக்கூஸ் எல்லாம்
நெய்பர்ஸு
கிச்சன்லாம் நமக்கு இல்லையா
கிச்சன் ஸ்மால் கிச்சன்
ஸ்மால் கிச்சன்
ஆப்ரேட்
டாய்லெட் பின்னாடி போனோம்
ஓகே
That place is near.
50 வருஷம் தான் கேரண்டி நல்ல உப்பு காற்று இல்லாத இடத்துக்கு இந்த உப்பு காற்று இருக்கிற இடத்துக்கு வந்து ஆர்சிஜி வந்து 10 வருஷத்துல கிராக் ஆயிரும் 10 வருஷம் தான் இதுக்கெல்லாம் கேரண்டி ஆனால் வார்டு வீடுனாக்கி ஆர்சிஜி கம்பி யூஸ் பண்ணாமல் பண்ணும்போது கம்பி யூஸ் பண்ணாமல் வார்டு வீடு கட்டி கம்பி சீல் யூஸ் பண்ணாமல் நம்ம வீடு கட்டணும்னாக்கி அது ஒரு 50 வருஷம் கேரண்டி
காற்று வரும், நல்ல கூலிங் இருக்கும், பரமாத்தத்துக்கு நல்ல ஏரியா,
நல்ல வீடு அந்த
நல்ல வீடு, அமைதியான வீடு. இது வந்து ஹீட்டாக இருக்கும். நம்ம எஃப்எம் ஃபேன் போட்டாலும் ஃபேன் ஹீட்டு வர நம்ம வெப்பம்
காற்று
வந்தாலும் வெளியில் போகாது, போனாலும் ஹீட்டாக தான் இருக்கும். அது அப்படி இல்லை, அது அந்த பக்கம் இந்த பக்கம் அது ஓடு வந்து ஹீட்டு கம்மியாகும். அதில் போட்டு வச்சுருவோம்.
நாங்க சுனாமில பாதிக்கப்பட்டவங்க எல்லாரும் ஒண்ணா இருக்கோம். நாங்க சந்தோஷம் கொண்டாட பிள்ளைகள் எல்லாம் சந்தோஷம் கொண்டாடுறோம்.
அதாவது இங்க இருக்கிற பொதுமக்கள் எல்லாம் கலந்து ஆலோசனை பண்ணி இன்னாருக்கு என்ன இடம் இன்னாருக்கு என்ன இடம் ஏன்னாக்கா நாங்களுக்கு கலக்கிறது
ஏன் வாங்கி தரீங்கன்னு தெரியுமா? முன்னாடி வராண்டால வந்துட்டு தலை ஒட்டி கொடுக்குறோம்ல, அந்த தளத்துக்கு வந்துட்டு நீங்க வந்துட்டு காசு அதிகமாகும். அந்த காசை காம்பன்சேட் பண்றதுக்கு நீங்க ஒரு கதவும் ஜன்னலும் வாங்கி தர மாதிரி இருக்கும். அது வாசக்கால இருந்துச்சுன்னா ஹாஸ்பிட்டல் இல்லைன்னா வேற ஒரு வெடி இதுவா
இது ஷர்ட் இதே இடத்துல வந்து இங்கே வந்துடுவாங்க. இந்த மெயின் ரோடு
சுத்துடா
இது
நல்லா இருந்து சார். இப்போ மாமா இறந்த பிறகு இப்போ தனியாக இருக்கிறேன்ல, தனியாக பிள்ளைங்களை வச்சுக்கிட்டு ஒரு கடை வச்சு சொல்கிறேன். அது குடும்பத்தோட இருந்து சரி சந்தோஷம். இப்போ அவங்க எல்லாரும் கஷ்டம் தான் இருக்கு, இருந்தாலும் கடை வச்சுக்கிட்டு 4 ஜனங்களும் பார்த்துக்கிட்டு போயிட்டு குடும்பத்தோட இருக்கிறது. ஒரு தண்ணி பைப்பும் போடல, ஒரு எந்த இதுவுமே இந்த பக்கம் இல்லை. ஆனா அங்க இருந்தது எல்லாமே எங்க தெருவுல இருந்தது. ஆனா இந்த பக்கம் வந்த பிறகு எதுவுமே இல்ல, பைப்பே இல்லம்மா. பைப்பு அங்க 60 வீட்டுக்கு ஒரு பைப் போட்டிருக்காங்க. அது எப்படின்னா தண்ணியே கிடைக்க மாட்டேங்குது.
அந்த சித்தோட மேல ஒரே வெயிலெல்லாம் இனிமேல் நீங்க இருக்க முடியாது. வெயில தான் காத்துல தான் உட்காந்து கடலுக்கு போறதுக்கு தூரம் இங்க இருந்து 1 கிலோலாம் இருக்குது. எங்களுக்கு என்ன பார்க்க மீன் தொழில் பாக்குறவங்களுக்கு பக்கத்துல இருந்தா தானே கஷ்டம் இல்லாம இருக்கும். ஆமா கொஞ்சம் பின்னாடி 15 அடி இருக்குது. இது 10 அடி, பின்னாடி 15 அடி. கிளியரா இருக்குது இல்ல, ரோடு கிளியரா இருக்கு, நீட்டா சைடா இருக்கு. அங்கனாக்க சந்து பொந்தா போகணும். இது சைடுனால
ஏற்பட்ட ஒரு சூழ்நிலையோ அல்லது என்னவோ என்னன்னு தெரியல. அது கடல் வளையத்துடைய ஒரு ஆராய்ச்சி பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் தான் நம்ம வந்து தெரிஞ்சுக்க முடியும். ஆனா இப்போதைக்குள்ள சூழ்நிலைங்கன்னா மீன் கிடைக்கிறதும் கம்மி. அதுக்கு முன்னாடி துடுப்பு போட்டுட்டு போகும்போதெல்லாம் கிட்டத்தட்ட மீன் கிடைக்கும்.
இங்கே வந்து 1/4 மணி நேரத்தில் கடலுக்கு போயிடும்.
தொழிலுக்கு போயிடலாம்.
அங்கே இருந்து வரதுன்னா ஒரு 1/2 மணி நேரம்.
ஒரு மெடிக்கல் போகும்போது ஹாஸ்பிட்டலில் போனோம், கொஞ்சம் தூரமாக போகணும் ஒன்று. அடுத்தபடியாக ரோடு போக்குவரத்து இல்லை, இதுக்கு மேலே போட்டு கொடுப்பாங்கன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். அதே நேரத்தில் இப்போ நாங்கள் போயிட்டு நாங்கள் எங்கே இருந்தாலும் ஒன்றா தான் சார் இருப்போம். நாங்கள் பிரிஞ்சே இருக்க வந்து ஒரு சரித்திரமே கிடையாது. நாங்கள் ஒன்றா தான் இருப்போம். இப்போ
எங்கே இருக்கா அது
தூரமோ கிட்டக்கையோ அதை பற்றி பிரச்சனை இல்லை. நாங்கள் எல்லாம் ஒன்றா தான் இருப்போம்.
இருக்க முடியாதா?
இருக்க முடியாது. பயம் கடல் இங்க வரும், பயந்து ஓடி போடும். எல்லாம் முழி இந்த ஓடுக்குள்ள
நல்லா இருக்கு.
நம்மளுக்கு வந்து காத்து போறது இதுதான் நல்லா இருக்கும். நம்மளுக்கு கடை
இது நல்லா இருக்குதா?
கடல்ல பிழைக்கிற நம்ம தானே, கடல்ல பிழைக்கிற நம்ம. ஒரு மரமட்டை இல்ல இந்த வெயில்.
Again, I visited these places again after 8 years. Now what I can see in these newer clusters, initially they were given in a small house like this. But today these houses have been modified in this manner. They extended their porches in the traditional pattern. They brought these mangrove tiles, or they have these tiled roofs. And wherever the spaces are left over, they converted as a small church so that they put the sea sand, and even the elderly women can sit there and pray. And they made a bell tower, which reflects exactly the same way of what the earlier parish church is there in the old location. So in that way, many modifications you can observe. They are bringing back the traditions, So in all these three aspects, three studies, what we have to learn here is, first of all, the traditions, they don't disappear. With time, they transform and they negotiate with the modernity. They negotiate and they try to establish a particular place for them. Like in the case, what we have seen here is they even brought the symbolic and the semantic versions of it. So where they brought in the same color and the same style, they built a bell tower. And when I have to observe how the people have adapted, it's not just a 1 year or 2 years, but when I started looking at 8 years, it has given me a completely different picture of what I have seen 5 years before or 7 years before. So in this way, we conclude this lecture that yes, the concept of second birth do exist, but this in the disaster context, the people are positioned into a new field. Whether it is Gujarat earthquake, whether it is a Latur earthquake, whether it is in El Salvador. So they have to adjust with certain new challenges, whether it is a land tenures, whether it is a layout of a settlement, whether it is a neighbors, whether it is a services. So they have to negotiate with these things. They do negotiate. And at the end of the day, what we actually see is they bring back certain things, and that is where the traditions negotiate. And they try to accommodate what they got also. In that way they try to adapt. So this is what we learn with this process. Thank you very much.